Fall's Visiting Artist Lecture Series brought to you by the School of Art at Syracuse University. I'm super excited to hear more from Karla about her work. And as usual, we have Castles here for an introduction of Karla's lecture this evening. Over to you, Castles. Thanks.
Thank you, Holly. So greetings, SU students and the internet at large. My name is Castles and I'm an artist. My pronouns are they, them, their. Welcome to In Plain Sight's takeover of Syracuse University's Visiting Artist Program. In Plain Sight, as you know by now, is a coalition of 80 artists, activists, and organizers, co-led by myself and fellow artist Rafa Esparza. We are honored to flood SU's lecture series this semester with some talented human beings that In Plain Sight engaged. It has been a week, 2 weeks in fact, since our last lecture, and though some of us have been exhaling with relief, we know full well that this was not the optimal situation, but at least it is now one where we have leaders in the White House who we can hold accountable. And we got to witness an impactful speech by Kamala Harris, which personally sucker punched me in the gut out of nowhere as she gave shout outs to immigrants, First Nations people, queers, and people of color. I felt moved more than I could have anticipated to witness a child of immigrants and a woman of color in the West Wing. However, we are not out of the clear yet. 45's attacks on the credibility of Joe Biden's election that he is forging through meritorious lawsuits could undermine Americans' trust in voting and can pose an immediate threat on the security and safety of the country, experts have warned. And as our inauguration approaches, we all wait to see how this divided country will handle this transition of power. There's been a lot of promise in Biden and Harris. They have called for the rollback of Trump's anti-immigrant agenda and to build a future that lives up to America's values. Harris has called for the use of presidential authority to protect undocumented immigrants, restore DACA program, implement Obama-era protections for the parents of dreamers, and to eliminate the age gap for DACA applicants. The Biden-Harris administration's success, of course, depends on two key factors, which is Congress and the courts. However, only this is workable with the Democratic majority. So all this to say, there's a lot of hollowed out and corrupt government agencies, including ICE, the CBP, and USCI, and it's going to take time for us to overhaul this. And more pressingly, any new laws or executive orders will meet swift legal challenges in the courts because of the judges that 45 has appointed. And all this to say that this is far from over and we must continue this fight for the rights of our immigrants and for the rights of all our brothers and sisters, because we are not free until we all are free. We must free them all. So it is against this dramatic backdrop and loaded backdrop that I'm honored to present tonight's visiting artist lecture. Carla Rosas is Karlinche, an undocumented illustrator and painter, born in Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, and based in New Orleans, Louisiana. Much of Karla's work explores the relationship between illegality, family history, queerness, and self-identity. Karla's work is grounded in the idea that the personal is indeed political, and she considers her art a form of reinserting her subjectivity and agency as an undocumented person in the United States. Karla's work has also been part of numerous political actions, both locally and nationally, including Flowers on the Inside, the postcard campaign in partnership with Culture Strike, which we also learned about through our previous visiting artist presentation with Julio Salgado, Cara Ocoris, and Forward Together, as well as banner-making collaborations with El Congreso de Jornalismo and the NOLA's People Assembly, that's the New Orleans People Assembly. In 2019, she was awarded the Define America Immigrant Artist Fellowship, she was only one of 8 artists that was selected nationally. And so it is a true honor to welcome the talented, beautiful illustrations and drawings and lessons to be imparted through Karla's work tonight. And so we're so happy to have you here. Thank you, Karla.
Here. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Castles, and thank you to Holly and to Jessica and to School of Visual Art for inviting me to give this talk. I'm so honored. I'm so grateful. I am an undocumented illustrator and painter from Nuevo Laredo, based here in New Orleans, and I'm happy and excited to share some of my work with you today. So I'm going to move on over to PowerPoint. I'm going to try to move on over to PowerPoint. First, I'm going to screen share. All right, we should be here. We should be ready to go. All right, y'all got it? Y'all can see me? Okay. Everyone else got to share baby photos of themselves, and I wanted to share baby photos of myself as well. So that's me, little mushroom head. I haven't left the United States since I was about 5 or 6 years old. My border crossing story doesn't really have a neat order. It doesn't have a beginning and an end. You know, back in those days, folks could travel between the US and Mexico for work pretty easily, and that was my family's experience. But when my sister Jocelyn was born with a disability, my family decided to stay in Texas for a little bit so that she could take advantage of the health care that she was entitled to as a US citizen. Border crossing stories are never yours alone. They're just as much your family's stories as well. And so out of respect for them and their privacy, I don't go into many more details. I do want to say, however, that I think the decision to stay is never as neat as the narratives in the media present them. 1 year will become 2, 2 years will become 5, and there isn't really a decision to stay that happens as much as a root is sown and family is created and community is born. You might find yourself many years later having made home in a place that fundamentally will not recognize you. So for a few years, my family, we lived all over Texas. But at some point in 2000, my mom decided to move to Louisiana with her 4 kids. Me, I'm the oldest. And we arrived to this tiny corner at the tip of the boot of South Louisiana called Cutoff. Seriously, it's called Cutoff. In my mom's story, she closed her eyes and she picked a random spot on the map. And that's where we ended up, Cutoff. Which I think is pretty lucky, because if her finger had been like half an inch lower, then we would have been living in the Gulf of Mexico. Obviously, that's not the real story, but that's the story that we tell in my family. I think a lot about the stories that we tell ourselves and the ways we make sense of immigration, right? And I'm fascinated by that process. I always have been. How a fact, an experience will become a story that eventually becomes a myth that's passed down in your family. And so that's why when people ask me what I do, I say that I like to draw and I like to tell stories. I grew up in Cutoff, and I don't think that any of y'all would be surprised to know that there weren't a lot of Mexicans or Latinas around at that time. Or rather, there weren't a lot of young people my age. And so that meant that for my siblings and I, as güerito, light skin as we were, we stuck out like a sore thumb. I mean, I spent a lot of my youth trying to run away from my Mexican identity. I would dye my hair blonde, I wore contacts, I worked really hard to get rid of my accent, and, you know, in some sense, I turned my back on kids who started to trickle in years later. They weren't Mexican, all of them. Some of them were Honduran, some of them were Guatemalan. My dream since I was a kid was to be an artist. I was going to go to school in New York to be an artist. I like to draw cartoons and weird little feminine figures, think very emo, very anime, Alex Pardee looking stuff. This is like a piece from when I was like 16, right? And really, I just wanted to get the hell out of Cutoff and out of our 1-bedroom trailer and away from my siblings and away from my life and just go do art. So I put a lot of work into excelling in school and getting good grades, extracurriculars, all of that. So my junior year rolls around, and coincidentally, I'm in the middle of some awful slut-shaming classic high school situation. And this guy, either because I put out or I didn't, I don't remember, starts a rumor. He starts a rumor that Karla is a wetback. So people start whispering in the halls, going up to me saying, I heard you were illegal. And I laugh it off, because I was born in Texas. That's what my mom said. I go home, I tell my mom, can you believe the shit that these people are saying? And she sits me down, and she tells me a story. I would like to say that I developed a political consciousness about my status at that moment, about what it meant to be undocumented in this country But I didn't, because I was in a rural corner of Louisiana, and I was an undocumented teenage girl, and I was angry and sad and afraid and so alone. And this is before Instagram. This is 2008, 2009. I didn't know about Dreamers. I didn't know about what was going on in California, New York, and all these other corners of the country. And my mom says that she just couldn't stand to see me being so bummed out anymore. So she called around and tells me to apply to this one university. And I did that. It was a private university, so they didn't have limitations on how they could hand out their scholarships. And I got in. And I got a pretty good scholarship, and between that and my mom and me working and some family friends giving us some support, I was able to go to college, even though I was undocumented. And this is, again, pre-DACA, pre-Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. But there was a catch. I couldn't do art. I had to study law. I had to study something that would help the whole family out. So I put my pens away and I put my paints away. College is when I really, and brief pause, this is Julio Salgado's art. This is an extremely inspirational piece to me. It'll make sense in a second. College is when I really began to understand what it is to be undocumented, and it just feels like you're running a race with bricks tied to your feet and everyone else is driving like really nice cars with air conditioning. It was hard. It was hard to relate to people. And then June 15th, 2012 happens. Now, I recognize that the Obama administration has caused a lot of pain to a lot of people and families through their deportation policies. But I'm setting that aside for just a second and ask you to try to understand what it felt like to hear what seems like your own story being told back to you by the President of the United States, no less. That's when he announced the DACA program. For the first time, it clicked in my head that I wasn't alone, that there were kids who were on the news who lived my situation, and they were very loud and very proud about their status. And it's around this time, too, that I see Julio Salgado's art for the first time, and I think to myself, damn, like, I don't have to keep this all to myself. I can talk about these stories, and since then I haven't kept it to myself. After college, I began working in immigration law. I was a paralegal for some time, and I also started to go to meetings by this local group called Congreso de Jornaleros, the Congress of Day Laborers here in New Orleans. They're a group that formed shortly after Katrina it's formed by directly impacted people, immigrant laborers, who were organizing to combat the injustices, the labor exploitation that was rampant in the city after Katrina, the reconstruction period following Katrina. I had seen photos of them online for some time, and I'd seen the signs that said, "Sin papeles, sin miedo, no papers, no fear." And I thought to myself, like, these are my people, I gotta get here. So I started going to the meetings, really just to listen. And two of the organizers, Fernando Lopez and Chloe Sigal, noticed that I made art. No, not that. Not that art. Noticed that I made art. And they invited me to join these banner making parties that Congreso members were holding in their backyard, in the backyard of the office. Now here's the thing. I didn't draw much at all throughout college. After graduation, I had started it up again. This is some of my early work. I was sharing with people, but a lot of this early art isn't what I would consider my best. I was still figuring out my style, still trying to process some traumatic things that had happened to me my senior year. And so I was really trying to figure out where I wanted to take my work. I knew that I wanted to focus more on art, though. That's another really early piece, right? But I also really enjoyed drawing people. I love drawing faces. And I don't know, maybe that's what they noticed, what Chloe and Fernando noticed, but I would go to the Congreso meetings every Wednesday night and just draw the people there. I just thought they were so beautiful, and they just made me happy, and it made me feel like I was part of something. Just drawing faces. And this is some of my current work. I would say that banner painting is when I first realized that art could be used in service, could be powerful. It could help to build community. It was a way that I could speak about my experiences in a way that would resonate with folks across status, right? Be part of a larger history. It's something that I realized could help me not feel so lonely, right? And so the banner making was really a formative period for me. And I want to share a little clip of what the banner making looks like in process, and then I'll talk about it some more. So just bear with me. This is a very blurry clip. This is not the best, but I hope it gives you some kind of image.
Sí, menos rayita en medio.
Wow!
Y esto lo podemos pintar.
So that's us making banners in 2016. These drawings were made by me, but the Congreso members painted them. And I really, really love painting signs and banners with people because it allows folks to really take messaging and imagery into their own hands, right? Of course, it's fun and it's therapeutic, right? But it also horizontalizes relationships because it stops this like dynamic of like, here's the artist, here's the organizer, and here's the base, right? It disrupts that. It says, no, we're all artists, we're all organizers, we're all the base. It's really fun. We would get everyone involved. The kids would come along. They'd paint their hands everywhere. And it also was this really beautiful organic feedback process, right? So for example, if a member would say, hey, I don't like this color, I don't like the way the placement of the hands, this makes us look like we're apologizing when we're not, that's stuff that I would take into consideration, right? It's something that I think is really important because messaging in political art sometimes seems very impersonal, right? And so, for example, when I see art that says immigrants deserve rights, like, of course I agree with that sentiment, but I'm more interested in positioning us as the subjects in these conversations. So saying we deserve rights, our rights, we fight. I think it's really important to one, remind everyone of who's involved and who's got the most at stake here, but also to set the narrative straight, right? When we look back at history later, we want to be able to say clearly that this was a people-centered movement. So here's some more photos of banner making with members of Congreso. And then here's a video of some of the banners from that march. I think from a process perspective, it's also really beautiful because you can see the many different hands that touched it, right? You can see that there are different styles of brush strokes and different people involved in it. And I think when you look at it together, it gives this very unified message, right? Like a whole group of people came together to create this one piece, and there is like unity to it. It's really, really, really powerful, I think. Here's some photos of them in action, our beautiful banners. Now this next piece has a really interesting story as well. This is Jose Torres, who is a local immigrant rights leader here. He claimed sanctuary in a church for 8 months. And so we made this banner to support him, to support that fight. And, you know, here's his little girls seeing themselves painted, right? The family has the banner now. And I'm happy to say also that he, as of June of this year, he's been granted his T visa, so he's able here. He now has legal status here. But, you know, it's just, I think, really important for me that people see themselves not only reflected in the art, but as the creators of it as well. I don't really have a methodology when I make art that is explicitly political. I mean, I think all art, of course, is political, but when I make art that is oriented at an explicit political issue or cause or movement, I really just challenge myself to center a person's agency as much as possible. And for me, that comes through in the imagery and the language, right? So I want to make sure that I draw faces, that I draw people and not symbols, not disembodied fist, but a person. I want to make sure that I use person-first language. We, me, our, I. I want people to have at the forefront who is the actor in this movement. These pieces that I'm showing here, this is from my We Can Manifest a World series. This series came together very, very quickly. This came, I shared these the day of the Daca decision, but I wasn't intending to. And when I say Daca decision, I mean when the Supreme Court this summer announced that it would not strike down Daca. We all knew around this time that the decision would be handed down any day. And documented organizers and allies were pretty much waiting on pins and needles for the decision to be handed down. We didn't know which way it was going to land. This is also at the same time that George Floyd's lynching and the movement for Black Lives is at the forefront of the public eye, right? And so there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of energy and a lot of anger. Speaking for myself, I have DACA. The Daca decision was an opportunity for reflection. It had been 8 years later, and many of us had been through huge life changes, right? And some of us hardly qualify as youth anymore, and yet that narrative of the young student, the innocent dreamer, persisted. Again, speaking for myself, I was feeling a little jaded after years of broken promises. I was angry at the child separation policies, at the camps at the border. I was aware now at this point of how this dreamer narrative was used to criminalize my family and people I care about, and basically anyone who was undocumented who didn't qualify for DACA protections. Also realizing how the media narrative of the dreamers in DACA really invisibilized Black youth. And so, I was juggling the sense of frustration, thinking to myself, is DACA as good as it gets for us? And what are we compromising for it? Who are we compromising for these scraps? And don't we all, as a collective, deserve more than this? So juggling that, and I didn't have any formal affiliation with a group or idea for this series. I just wanted to convey these emotions. And I also wanted to use the opportunity to highlight political movements here in New Orleans, because I would say that I'm very much a product and very much influenced by Southern-based organizing and movement history here. So I created this series and I used it as a fundraising opportunity. It's a limited edition print. Only one edition of them was ever printed, and I use that as a way to gather funds for 3 separate groups here in New Orleans that I felt deserved recognition beyond New Orleans. One being the City Waste Union, which is sanitation workers who are on strike for fair wages during COVID. The other being Familias Unidas en Acción, which is a group of directly impacted immigrant families who were basically running a food distribution program for almost 600 families here, because many undocumented families didn't qualify for any kind of COVID relief. And the other group was the New Orleans People's Assembly, and they've really been at the forefront demanding accountability from the city for injustices that working class Black people of New Orleans face. So I wanted to use that opportunity to highlight that work. And I also wanted to create a conversation, right? Inviting us to dream, right? Playing with that word dreamer, right? Can we dream of a world beyond what we have now? And what does that world look like, right? So inviting us to imagine, to be inspired, to dream, but also phrasing it as a demand, right? We can manifest a world beyond these things. I think also for me it was important to use my positionality as a DACA recipient, understanding that I have a privileged position in the media narrative around immigration as the good immigrant, right? I wanted to disrupt that and use my position to say, hell no, look, me, but also everybody comes with me. And I think it's a sentiment that a lot of documented folks feel nowadays. I also wanted to share a project that I'm working on currently. It's called Caras Vemos, Corazones No Sabemos. I'm working on this in collaboration with another artist named Fernando Lopez. He's a photographer and documentarian. This is a mixed media portrait series. that spotlights members here in New Orleans of the community who are crucial to its movement building. And so the idea is corazones vemos, caras vemos, corazones no sabemos, comes from a Mexican phrase that means the faces we see, the hearts we don't. And we wanted to create portraits that you might see from different actions or just in organizing spaces, right? And really sit with them and ask them about who they were outside of that political dimension, right? What are the things that inspire them? What are the things that make them feel at home? What are their memories of? What do they miss? What is important to them? And so we worked closely with individuals, not really treating them as subjects, but trying to really engage with them as collaborators in their own portrait, right? So again, centering agency, interviewing them extensively and using those interviews to create the imagery in the painting, and then also incorporating things from their home and from them into the painting. So for example, this is Alessandra. Alessandra is one of the founders of Casa Amor y Solidaridad, Love and Solidarity. She runs a housing space for queer and trans immigrants that are newly arrived to New Orleans. And she contributed a letter that she wrote, and she wanted that to be a part of the piece. So we enlarged it and collaged the letter and used that as the foundation for the background. And she's also an incredible artist herself, makes these beautiful crochet art. You see a little scan of that heart, she made that. And so we incorporated yarn into it as well to just pay honor to that she is also herself an artist. See what's next. So that's one track of my art, right? That's the more overtly or explicitly political work that I do. I think of my art as having two tracks. There's one that bears witness to the stories that I see in community that I want to share, and then there's the other track that is a little more personal, that bears witness to my story as a being who crosses borders on multiple dimensions, right? Not just the geographic border that criminalizes me. And so the slide is a little bit out of order, so I'm going to backtrack a bit. This is from my more personal work. This is from a series called Lupe, Lupe Travels. So the idea behind this is I wanted to create a being that could encapsulate all of my petty immigrant thoughts, right? So not the like major existentialist grief around being here in this country, right? But more like the petty thoughts that I think about sometimes, about how inconvenient or annoying it is to be undocumented. And I wanted to put it in this figure that was like this big, clunky, androgynous, almost godlike figure, but also still very human, still very petty. And it's a comic series, right? And so this one, Lupe is flying, and the text reads, sometimes, well, one second. Sometimes she closes her eyes, and she can see all the places she's ever called home. She can go anywhere she wants when she closes her eyes. She becomes a wind, whispering in your ear. Vete a la chingada con tus papeles. So it's meant to be humorous, right? There's meant to be playing with that gravity of the immigrant experience and kind of making light of it. The last line, Vete a la chingada con tus papeles, says you and your papers can go fuck themselves. And this is a piece that I made just reflecting on how straight up annoyed I get seeing all these beautiful photos of y'all in Mexico traveling. Like, I'm very happy that y'all do it, and by all means stimulate the economy, but you know, I get to be petty about it in my head, right? And so this is a piece kind of reflecting on that, you know, inability to travel, to see your own homeland. This is another piece in that series, in the Lupe series. This one reads, and on the seventh day, Lupe decided she was done with men's bullshit. So she stripped off her guilt and her clothes. Then she ran around the city screaming, Aquí está la gracia de tu santísima madre! Translation: I'm not doing shit for you bums anymore. this one, if you're a bilingual person, you'll immediately catch on to the joke. The joke being that "Aquí está la gracia de tu santísima madre" is not a literal translation of "I'm not doing shit for you bums anymore." It means something else, right? So were I to translate that directly, it would read, "Here is your holy fucking mother's grace." Right, but I'm very interested in playing with language and the way you can translate things on different dimensions, right? So what would be the relationship between "here is your holy mother's fucking grace" and "I'm not doing shit for you bums anymore," right? I really love playing with language, and in some ways it's a way to signal to other bilingual folks that there's jokes that we can be in. And to disrupt the monolingual ear, right? Because you're so used to seeing things on your terms that now you have to do the extra work of consulting with Google to get the joke. So that's a piece in that series. And the other ones are on my Instagram and on my website. I'm playing again with language. This is some of my traditional painting. I work with acrylics. I also like incorporating gold into my work. This is a painting. It says, "Soy la santa patrona de vete a la chingada y déjame en paz." I love when people ask me that, what it means, because I get to respond, "I'm the patron saint of go fuck yourself and leave me alone." Right? So it's a way of like kind of again playing with that monolingual ear and having you ask me, and then I get to retort with something that might offend you but isn't meant to be offensive. I'm just reading to you what it means. That's what it means. When I made this piece, I was thinking a lot about the way that we glorify moms and their work, and don't often give them a space to vent, to desahogar, to say what they really feel, right? Imagine if your mom every now and then was like, "Leave me alone," right? So yeah. This is another piece. I don't have a lot of like very straightforward artistic influences. I'm much more inspired by music, I would say, than I am by like a particular artist or movement in art. I love music. I love corridos. I love norteños. I love old Mexican music. I think it's fascinating. And in particular, I love the lyrics. I think they're so emo. They're so passionate. They say things like, "I am going to claw my eyes out because I love you so much." I mean, it's beautiful. It's so intense. And I'm also interested in it because within it, there's this very toxic relationship to alcohol, to gender, to love that I recognize that I'm a product of. And so I'm interested in exploring it and kind of reconciling it, right? As much as I love it, recognizing its harmfulness. So this piece right here is called La Puerta Negra, the Black Door. And La Puerta Negra is a very, very famous song by a band called Los Tigres del Norte. They're like entry-level Mexican regional music, right? And on its surface, the song is about two lovers who can't be together because their parents won't let them be together. Their parents refuse to open the black door. They say that parents won't open the black door, and this black door is a symbol of like the couple's love and their passion for each other. And in the song, the singer says that, you know, it's somebody must have closed the black door on them once upon a time, and that's why the parents now refuse to open the door for the couple. So that got me to thinking, well, what is the black door, right? Beyond this heteronormative romance, like what is the black door, and what are the black doors in our families? What are the doors as immigrants that we will not open? For me, that black door is maybe accepting that everything in here isn't all woman, right? And isn't all Mexican anymore, or isn't neatly that anymore. I think at large, I was just reflecting on how we glorify Mexican identity and we glorify like our indigenous ancestry as part of what it means to be Mexican, but at the same time, we treat indigenous communities in Mexico, and I mean here as well, so badly, right? And so I wanted to create a piece that kind of spoke to this like falseness of this Mexican identity. And, you know, you'll see the figures are very androgynous. The clothes is haphazard. They don't fit properly, right? There's something false about it. To me, it's just my grand reflection on this like idea of what it means to be Mexican and how we build this up and then we never open it again. We never talk about it again. the mariachi suit is a very classic symbol of like Mexican hypermasculinity. So for me, it's important that, you know, we have like an androgynous, seemingly feminine figure wearing the outfit. You'll also notice this spiky hair, which is a thing I do a lot in my art. Hair for me is sacred. It represents something ancient to me, and I love drawing hair, but I also think a lot about how I can fuck with gender, right? Because I'm too femme or too masculine in either direction. I really want my art to look like it could be either or. So I love the hair, the way I do the hair in that way, because it represents like a crown. It's like a crown extending outward. And I'm interested in seeing how we can convey power and godliness and almost out of timeness in a way that isn't European, right? So instead of using a crown, or instead of like relying on very like traditional Catholic symbols, how can I create a symbol that makes you think of this like ancient, powerful, godly, androgynous power that's in all of us, right? And so for me, that's the spiky hair. And side note, if you come across cool spiky haired photos, you can always send them to me on Instagram. I love when people do that. It means a lot. So here's some more examples of the hair as crown. As you can see, it's a pretty strong theme in my work. This is another piece. Again, to me, it's just about that androgyny and power and godliness that exist in all of us. And those are my smart reasons for my smart reasons for why I do the hair. My other reason for doing the hair is not quite as profound. It really comes down to this meme that I found on the internet a long time ago. I saw that and I was like, what is the story behind this? What is going on? And thinking about the tenderness of like, these young men are styling their grandmama's hair. The act of styling hair is such a gendered thing. It's the thing that women do to themselves or to other women. But here you have these young men that are so lovingly and painstakingly brushing and combing her hair and making it into this crown. And she's got a machete, and it's just like, I mean, it's so beautiful and bizarre. I love it. And so I really try to imbue my work with that energy as well. If anyone ever finds the story behind this image, I would be so grateful too. I haven't been able to locate it. This is some of my more recent work. This is acrylic on wood. This one is called Hija de Nadie. Again, really playing with masculinity and exploring that in relation to my Mexican identity. The piece is called Hija de Nadie, or Hija sin patria o padre, which would translate to daughter of no one, or daughter without father or fatherland. And I want to share with you a brief clip. I'm going to pop it into the chat, and hopefully y'all can see it. If you bear with me for just a second, because I'm not the most adept at this Zoom thing. So I do want to try to pop this into the chat. If I can, how can I pop it into, oh, here we go. All right. So I ask y'all, it should already be at the part. I just want you to watch this clip just briefly, and then I'm also going to have the lyrics up here so that you can understand them if you're a monolingual speaker. All right. So I'm going to give it about a minute. I hope that's enough time for everyone to have seen it. So I'm gonna move along just in the interest of time. I do hope that was enough time though. This song is Hija de Nadie by Yolanda del Rio, and it's been incredibly inspirational to my work. This is an old song about just like a tragic story, right? And the chorus, she sings, I too am nobody's daughter. I can only count on one last name. I have to give thanks to my mother. I haven't even met my father. I think he must be a coward of the many who have come to the world. Guilty are the cruelest fathers who never deserve to be men. They go around cheating on women and denying their children their names. I don't understand why they don't die before they do evil and betrayal. And it's classic melodramatic Mexican like ranchero music, right? It's super like dramatic and in your face. And if you see the performance, she's got her hands in the air and she's like singing like she's crying. It's so powerful. It's so intense. And the reason I vibe with it so strongly is the obvious dimension. I am the daughter of a single mother. I only have one last name. And so I do have a lot of pain and anger around the ways that I see masculinity hurt families and hurt the men I love and care about, particularly within my own culture. At the same time, recognizing that there's a strong Mexican masculinity within me that I want to honor and that I'm proud of and that I identify strongly with. So there's that strand of it, but also, you know, hija sin patria o padre, without father or fatherland, makes me think a lot about my own experience as an undocumented person and my anger at my so-called fatherland, at Mexico, for never being there, for not caring about our people, for never taking accountability for the pain that we go through here without any recognition. And so for me, the piece is meant to play with both of those dimensions, right? Like the interpersonal pain of masculinity and of being a daughter who's forced to wear and adopt these roles and kind of live with them, right? And also being someone being of a country that refuses to care about you, right? And so that's something that I've been exploring a lot in my work. It's something that I want to keep exploring as I go forward, and yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Here's some of my more recent work. This is more illustrative based. I work digitally a lot now, and I really enjoy creating textures from found items from outside from my walks. I'll scan them into my computer, and I'll mess with them on Photoshop, and I'll use them to create textures to sort of give my image a little more of an organic feel. Even though it's done digitally, there's still that sense of like nature within it. And yeah, I hope that y'all enjoyed it. That's all I have to share. I feel like I've been speaking a lot, so I'm super excited to sit back and listen to y'all's questions. Yeah, that's it on my end. Thank you.
Thank you. Great, Karla. If you want to stop screen sharing, there we go. I will ask the students to put some questions in the chat, and then I'll do my best to navigate through those. Questions to load. I was so moved by how you felt making the banners, that you said that it made you feel less lonely in that art making experience. And I'm wondering, how has this time of COVID affected you, or how have you remedied that kind of isolation, if you have at all?
Well, it's certainly been harder to see people in person. I think the way that I've tried to remedy that isolation is to just really engage more in conversations when I make the pieces. Like when I made the Manifest Beyond series, was a lot of that was just listening to what folks on the ground were saying, right, and involving them in that and finding a way to cross collaborate, right, to use that as an opportunity to fundraise. So just exploring that, I think, basically has helped remedy the loneliness. Of course, nothing replicates like the process of being able to be in person with someone and create something, but nevertheless, you feel more in community with someone when you know that, you know, they're supporting you, they had a hand in helping with the message maybe, and they're like they're concretely benefiting from it. I feel like I'm still able to use my art in service, right?
Great. There's a question in here from Abe who was asking, was it hard to take a break from art throughout college? Did it feel like something was missing for you?
Yeah, it was super hard. It was really hard for me. Yeah, it was difficult. I did feel like something was missing for me, and I also think it having had that experience, I now know what I don't want to do, right? And so like the thing that really got me back in it was actually like a petty comment from a friend in school. I was like, I like to do art, and they're like, well, I've never seen you do art. You're not an artist. And that's really what lit the fire in me. I was like, oh wait, hold up, you know nothing about my whole trajectory. But yeah, it was hard. It was sad.
As I mentioned yesterday when we spoke briefly, I have a number of illustration majors here in this class, and so we have some specific questions regarding that. Do you mind taking some of those? Well, you'll hear the question and you can decide. Well, there's sort of open-ended question is, do you have any advice from one illustrator to another?
Do I have any advice from one illustrator to another? My advice would be to be very firm in your style, and whatever little idiosyncrasy you find in it, take it and run with it, because that'll be the thing that sets you apart, and the thing that keeps you going. I'll also say, think about how color can tell a story and how texture can tell a story when you do your illustrations as well.
Great. Along those same lines, how does your education and your work in the law field impact your life now?
Well, I get hit up for stuff when people need help. How does it impact me? I mean, I would say, so a lot of what I did was actually writing down people's declarations. I worked with a lot of asylum-seeking people, and so we would sit together and they would draft a declaration, which is their story of why they're here. And I would say that was extremely influential to me. It really imbued in me, or reaffirmed for me my love of stories, and also understanding that stories aren't linear, right? So, you know, there's this like weird dissonance between like how a story is valued in the legal realm, right, as like a linear set of facts that lead to a conclusion, and then how stories organically are, which the circumstances might change, the memories might change, smells and colors figure. And so I'm grateful to that experience, because I think very deeply now about how stories don't have to be linear in order for them to be true.
Great. A few questions about music. One is, what other musicians or songs do you love or have you found impactful in your work? And then a secondary relation to that is, have you considered doing specific illustrative work for the music industry, given your love of music?
So I love this question. So I would say that two artists that have been super formative for my work in terms of color and also imagery, Erykah Badu and Outkast, right? I'll start with Outkast. I think like magical realism has a beautiful tradition in Latin America, but also in the Southeast. And like Outkast is a magical realist group to me. I mean, you look at like Miss Jackson, at some of those videos, and like the way they incorporate like animals into like the mundane or into urban landscapes to create like magic, I think is so powerful and beautiful. And so I try to think about too, like, how can I make this like everyday seem magical? With Erykah Badu, I would say that she writes from a very personal, very first person oriented perspective, but it always comes off as very universal. And so I try to channel that in my work, like not so much trying to make like, when I make more personal oriented pieces, I don't focus so much on making grandiose political statements as much as like trying to focus on a snapshot of a moment. How do I feel in that moment, and what can I say from that moment? And so, yeah, have I considered making art in the music industry? So I love when my partner is a musician, so I'll collaborate with him on like covers for mixtapes and stuff. And I have worked with like local artists here to make art. I love when artists ask me to do that. I also like have illustrated which is like sound like mixtapes. So yes, I have done that. I enjoy it a lot. Always looking to do it more. It's fun, and you get to listen to good music while you do it. So it's great. I enjoy it.
Great. We have a question from Daisy, who's watching on YouTube. And Daisy wants to know, I know slogan making is always a huge part of organizing and political work. What is your process for manifesting slogans and text in your work?
I actually, I would say this is something I struggle with, honestly. I tend to word vomit. I sit with something and I think about what's the easiest way that I can convey a complex idea in a short amount of words. And also I've been challenging myself to use words outside of like the political or like fighting vocabulary, right? So like dreaming, manifesting, creating, magicking, just kind of like disrupting that. I will say it is difficult, and I oftentimes just take guidance from what other people say, right? Like, don't break it if it's not broken. And if other organizers have already like come up with the perfect thing, run with it. But give it credit. Say who came up with it.
Great, good. Here's a question. Do you see the isolation or loneliness created by the in-between amongst culture as a trauma?
Yes. Of course. I mean, I don't know how much more I can say to that. Yeah, I think it's traumatic to feel like you aren't valued or supported by either. I think it's an ongoing thing, and I think it's hard to remedy and something that kind of requires a lot of internal work. Yeah, it's a trauma, and it's not limited to the immigrant experience, of course, right? It's for anyone who feels like they don't quite fit in the either category. Yeah.
Right. Where do you go for visual inspiration when creating a piece?
I like to be outside. As COVID has kind of taken over everyone's life, I feel like my world has gotten smaller. So I've been exploring the streets around me a lot more. Luckily, I live in the most beautiful city in the world, so there's lots of natural landscapes, and like the houses here are all pinks and purples and greens. And so I go out there and I think about how like man-made or human-made architecture is like playing with like nature, and that's been really inspiring for me lately.
Cool. That sounds beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Here's a good one from, it just moved, Kat. How do you see your art being incorporated into communities in the future?
I see my art being incorporated into communities in the future. It's a good question. I think what I would like to see with my art is I would like for younger kids to see my art and not feel so alone. Specifically kids from my part of the country. So that's that. If I can achieve that, if I can get like young people to see my art and see themselves in it, or maybe not necessarily see themselves in it, but see that they could do it too, I would consider that a win. I have this like dream of having a community center here in New Orleans that's like a Latinx art center that's like kind of like the stuff you see in the Mission. Like that is the dream. I want murals made by the kids everywhere, and it doesn't necessarily need to be my art, but if I can have a hand in helping make it, I would consider that the dream. Yeah.
Great. Just to continue on with that, I'm going to push you with this question from Cassidy, and she wants to know, what do you see yourself doing in the near and also far future?
Super rich with a mansion and a big giraffe. No, in the near future, I'm currently working on a chapbook of illustrated prose, so not quite poetry, not quite comics, but somewhere in between, called Desahogando, Undrowning. So in the near future, I'd like to finish that. And I'd like to share it with people because I haven't shared much of my written work before. In the long term, I'd like to see myself working in some kind of community art space. I really would like to share what I've learned with other people and not see, the movement already exists, but I'd like to see more visibility for the art scene, the Latino art scene here, and particularly community, the children of immigrants. So anybody wants to fund that art center for me, just, send them my way.
Cool. Karla, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Okay. To my younger self, I would say to just be patient. And to trust the little weird thought and run with it. And to accept that everything is part of a story, right? I mean, I wouldn't tell myself to not study law or political science or philosophy. It ended up well for me. I would just say to just be patient and to trust the little weirdness. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Great advice, everybody. This is from YouTube. We have Rafa there, and Rafa once says, "You're a great storyteller, Karla, and it comes through in your illustrations. Are there contexts you enjoy most to share your work in, and what formats and future spaces would you like to see it in?"
What are the contexts I love to share my work most in? I actually really enjoy sharing my art in the digital realm on Instagram. Not so much for the likes, that's terrible. That's awful. But I really enjoy seeing people react to it in real time and having people comment on it. And when people message me, that actually means a lot and say like, hey, this brought up this for me. And I don't feel like I quite get that if I'm showing in a gallery, not that that's possible right now necessarily. So I actually really enjoy that process, and I think it democratizes things too, right? Because you don't need to be in a gallery. If you get 4,000 followers, you have a pretty good following, and people are seeing your work. And in spaces I'd like to see it, I don't need to draw it, but I would love one day, I want like some kind of like visual anime, not quite anime, but an animated film that's that tells the story of like a kid who migrates to the US in like fantastical, amazing mythological detail. I want it to be trippy and beautiful and just like super intimate at the same time. And that's where the format I'd like to see my art in one day.
Awesome. That sounds great. I like that. I think I told you that most of the students in the class are undergrads. We have a few grads also, but I think this question is probably one that many people struggle with, and that is, what do you do when you have an art block?
What do you do when you have an art block? Okay, that is, so one thing that's been really helpful for me has been to ritualize the art making process, right? And so especially like if you're transitioning into doing art more regularly, or if you're like in some, might not apply to y'all necessarily because y'all are art students, but one thing that was helpful for me is designating a day. Like my Sundays were my art days for a long time, and like, do not touch them, do not text me, nothing. And it wasn't that I had to finish a piece, it's just that was my art day. And also just kind of expanding, right, what it means to do art. So like, it doesn't mean you have to be painting. If you're a painter, go dance, right? Think about movement in that way, right? Or if like you're really struggling with like a line, right? The line isn't being drawn the way you want to, right? Go make lines in some other way. Go cut something. Go think of, just get out of that rigidity and explore it beyond, and you'll find that you'll get back to it. But it happens. It happens.
Great. Are there, I guess, summing up, there's some repetitive questions here, but I guess I would like to just leave you with the the last statement on anything that you think is important you want to share with this group.
Anything that I think is, well, I want to share that I think sometimes when you're making art, there's this pressure to make it seem like it's explicitly political or about something bigger than yourself, right? And that might be a critique you get, but I actually think there's a lot of power in intimacy. I actually think there's a lot of universality in our experiences, and so I think that rather than to run away from yourself in your art, and you really need to find you really need to, I think, explore the little details of yourself in your work, and I encourage people to do that. And again, when it comes to like explicitly political art, if that's what you want to make, look inwardly too. Really look inwardly and draw out those details, and I think you'll make better art for it. And I think you'll find in the long term that people will vibe with it.
That's
I
good.
think we make too much out of difference sometimes.
That's very profound. Thank you for that. Another question popped up, if you don't mind. I'm going to ask you another one, and this is, how can we as artists encourage young people of color to get involved in art as a form of processing?
I would say there's a lot in that question. I would say young people of color are already doing art, and they're already doing art as a form of processing. I would say the way to encourage them to stick with it is to on a large scale, put money into these programs, right? But on a smaller scale, find ways to show them that they can actually make a living from it. And I think that's because every young person of color that I've ever met, that I've ever grown up with, is an artist. They all are in some way or another, but at some point somebody told them that they couldn't make a living from it, or that it wasn't something they could do. And so I think as artists, we just have to support and put our money into these people, so that they realize that it's something that actually can sustain them. I'm not saying that everyone needs to make a living from it, but just to show that there's value in it. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you. We're getting some applause. Thank you, Castles. Thank you so much, Karla. This has been just such a beautiful gift for us this evening. Thank you for sharing your work and your thoughts and your generous answers to all these questions.
Thank you so much for having me here.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah, that was amazing. You're such an exceptional storyteller, and I love the performative voice. Really good. And we want to see your work animated. That has to happen. It's just like must. So let's brainstorm on that. We're out in Hollywood over here.
Yeah.
We'll cook up some thoughts on that for sure. Yeah, but yeah, just very wise, very thoughtful, and very beautiful work. So thank you so much.
Thank y'all so much for having me here, for sharing with me.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you.